tweets this morning as well. President Trump's speech last night was supposed to be a pretty straightforward stump for Alabama Senator Luther Strange, who faces a tough special election primary this week. But that is far from the headline coming out of President speech. Peter Doocy, live, Huntsville, Alabama. Headlines this morning, Peter, about what the president said of the NFL and really taking aim not only at the NFL, but some NFL owners. How is that being received in the South today?
Leland, when he started railing against the NFL, it got as much applause as anything else in an hour-and-a-half-long speech filled with standing ovations. This is a state that loves their football, and they really liked it when the president got them all riled up as he got the crowd all against NFL players who do not stand but instead take a knee during the national anthem.
We're proud of our country. We respect our flag. Wouldn't you love to see one of these NFL owners, when somebody disrespects our flag, to say, get that son of a bitch off the field right now, out, he's fired. He's fired.
And the president wasn't done with the NFL there. He pointed to their lower than normal TV ratings so far this season and said that kneeling during the anthem contributes somewhat, but so does an overemphasis on player safety.
Two guys just really beautiful tackle. Boom, 15 yards. The referee gets on television. His wife is sitting at home. She's so proud of him. They're ruining the game. Right? They're ruining the game. Hey, look, that's what they want to do. They want to hit, okay? They want to hit, but it is hurting the game.
The NFL Commissioner Roger Goodell did not appreciate the president's sentiment last night. He's got a statement out this morning that says, in part, divisive comments like these demonstrate an unfortunate lack of respect for the NFL, our great game, and all our players, and a failure to understand the overwhelming force for good our clubs and players represent in our communities. And Goodell may have his hands full for a few more games because the president is also urging his supporters to walk out of any NFL stadium where they see a player taking a knee before the game starts during the anthem. Leland.
Wow. Stakes are getting raised. Football Sunday coming up tomorrow. Jim Gray on this a little bit later in the show. Peter, now to the topic for the reason you were sent to Alabama, which is a Luther Strange special election coming up. The president going down to stump for that. How much of the rally was about Big Luther, and how much of an effect do you feel like it had on the president's supporters there?
Stories about Strange, Leland, were woven into the rest of the president's remarks about the other things that he was addressing. But the president cast Senator Strange as one of the most reliable Republican senators who always plays ball with the White House. And he says that he is the only Republican he thinks could win in November here in Alabama.
I told Luther, I have to say this, if his opponent wins, I'm going to be here campaigning like hell for him. But I have to say this, and you understand this, and just look at the polls. Luther will definitely win. No? You know what I'm saying. Roy has a very good chance of not winning in the general election.
He was referring there to Judge Roy Moore, Strange's opponent, but the president says he will help either Republican. He just really, really prefers Strange, and the White House is doing their part to make sure that he has the best possible chance on Tuesday in the runoff. President Trump was here last night, Vice President Pence here on Monday. Leland.
Yeah, and one of President Trump's former folks he would send out to TV, Sebastian Gorka, no longer with the White House. He's now on Roy Moore's side. He'll join us a little bit later in the show. Peter, you're going to have an interesting couple days. Thank you, sir. And we're going to take a closer look at the fallout over President Trump's comments on the NFL with Fox News contributor Jim Gray, and a little bit later in the show. A lot to talk about there.
That's right. Turning our attention in the meantime overseas, Iran State TV announced the successful test of a new kind of ballistic missile, defying President Trump's threats to pull out of the nuclear deal. The missile tested was a medium-range ballistic missile with a range of more than 1,000 miles, according to Iranian State TV. And a little bit later in the show, Fox News national security and foreign policy expert Waleed Phares will join us with more insight into the tensions between the U.S. and Iran.
And how North Korea plays into all of that. Speaking of North Korea, just a few minutes from now, North Korea's foreign minister will address the United Nations General Assembly. The Hermit Kingdom has ramped up angry rhetoric towards the United States this week and threatened another nuclear test. Right now, at the podium at the UN there, you see the Saudi foreign minister. Outside to take it all in, Brian Yennis in New York. And Brian, you have to think that perhaps the North Koreans are doing a little rewriting this morning after the Little Rocket Man comments about their leader last night.
Yeah, Leland, look, we fully expect the unprecedented war of words between the United States and North Korea to continue, if not escalate today, when North Korea's Foreign Minister Ri Yong-ho addresses the United Nations General Assembly today. Make no mistake about it. He will be addressing the UN on behalf of North Korea's leader, Kim Jong-un, who on Friday issued a statement in what is believed to be the first time a North Korean leader directly issued a statement to the world under his own name, firing back at President Trump for his UN General Assembly speech and for other what he thinks are provocations. And in this statement, Kim Jong-un said, quote, "I will make the man holding the prerogative of the supreme command in the U.S. pay dearly for his speech. Whatever Trump might have expected, he will face results beyond his expectation. I will surely and definitely tame the mentally deranged U.S. dotard with fire." Now, the statement is a reaction in part to Trump's UN General Assembly speech, in which he said that the U.S. would totally destroy North Korea if it was forced to defend itself or its allies. It was also in that speech that the president mockingly called Kim Jong-un Rocket Man in front of the entire world and said he was on a suicide mission. Well, to Kim Jong-un's statement, President Trump tweeted yesterday his own reaction, firing back, quote, "Kim Jong-un of North Korea, who's obviously a madman who doesn't mind starving or killing his people, will be tested like never before." So surely we can expect more fighting words today when the foreign minister Ri Yong-ho goes up there and speaks. This is the same foreign minister who earlier this week said that the president sounded like a dog barking at the United Nations in terms of calling and how he described President Trump's speech. So aside from those personal jabs, though, and the fighting words, we fully expect Ri Yong-ho to defend North Korea's nuclear program today and to push back against what they see as unprecedented international pressure. And just this month, the UN Security Council passed more sanctions going after North Korea's oil and textile industries, natural gas industries, and foreign workers. President Trump also signed an executive order allowing the U.S. to sanction companies that finance trade with North Korea, and all of this as China's central bank is now moving to stop all banks from trading with North Korea, as well as going after oil trade with that country. Now, coinciding with all of this, a bit of a pep rally today. Yeah, if you can believe it, North Korea putting together a mass rally against America today, up to 100,000 people rallying in Pyongyang, the country's capital, as they really get ready for what they believe is going to be a big speech today from the foreign minister on behalf of Kim Jong-un. And Leland, all of this happening as the foreign minister of North Korea threatened that they are preparing ready to shoot a thermonuclear weapon in the air and to test that bomb over the Pacific Ocean, which would be the first time that a nuclear device exploded above ground in any test around the world since 1980. So the stakes are extremely high today. Yeah. And unfortunately for the world, we expect a further escalation in terms of just with the words today, no doubt.
Very high indeed. It was the Chinese back in the 1980s who did that. Brian Yennis at the UN. Brian, back to you as the North Koreans take the podium. Thank you.
Well, big news on Capitol Hill this week. Senator John McCain saying no to the Cassidy Graham health care bill. Some are now unsure if it will even come to a vote. Ellison Barber has a look at the next steps for Congress this week. Hi, Allison.
Hi, Liz. McCain is the second Republican senator to say that he will not support the Cassidy Graham bill. The other is Kentucky Senator Rand Paul. Maine's Susan Collins is on the fence and expressed concern over this bill before McCain even came out against it. Last week, a spokesperson for Majority Leader Mitch McConnell told Fox News McConnell intended to consider the Graham-Cassidy bill on the floor this week. Now, that seems to be a question mark.
We'll see this week. The leader intended, he said, to bring it to a vote this week, and it's more difficult path now, but we'll see.
Republicans cannot afford to lose more than 2 Republicans. Many say McCain put the bill on life support. Some Democrats say he proved once again that he's a hero.
Thank you, John McCain. And John McCain has a conscience, and I wish very much that the rest of the Republican leadership had that conscience as well.
President Trump criticized McCain's decision, but the White House is still optimistic. White House Director of Legislative Affairs Mark Short told Fox and Friends this morning that he's confident they will repeal Obamacare, and he says the president is more than ready to sign legislation that does exactly that.
Congress needs to deliver that bill to them. This is our last best chance before the September 30th deadline to get this bill done. It comes down to 4 senators, as you mentioned. Right now, Senator Paul, Senator McCain, Senator Murkowski, and Senator Collins are the ones that we're trying to convince to get 2 of the final 4 votes in order to repeal Obamacare.
Republicans hoped to pass health care legislation by the end of September, in part because with special budget rules, they could pass the bill with a simple majority, 50 yeses instead of the normal 60. Liz?
All right, Allison Barber with the very latest. Allison, thank you so much.
All right, let's bring in the Hill newspaper's policy editor, Kim Dixon, for more. Kim, nice to see you. Thanks for being with us. All right, fair to say the president has a unique way of whipping votes occasionally. Take a listen to him last night.
John McCain's list. John McCain was not on the list, so that was a totally unexpected thing. Terrible. Honestly, terrible. Repeal and replace, because John McCain, if you look at his campaign, his last campaign, was all about repeal and replace. Repeal and replace. So he decided to do something different, and that's fine. And I say we still have a chance to.
Well, hard to understand how he wasn't on the list of a whip count when he was the one who killed the last go around for repeal and replace. Put that aside for a second. President seems optimistic. Mark Short earlier on Fox and Friends, optimistic as well. Give us your read of the tea leaves. Is this bill dead and buried, or is this bill on some form of terminal life support and can be brought back?
It's definitely on life support. We've got Rand Paul, who's a no. We've got Susan Collins, another moderate, who is leaning no. And if you look at the map of where the money goes in this bill, it's not good for the people that are on the fence. Lisa Murkowski is another person on the fence, and she's going to get a 38% cut in funds under the Graham-Cassidy GOP replace bill. So it's not looking good.
May not look good. How worried are Republican senators, and for that matter, Republicans in the House, who are all up for election in 2018? Matt Schlapp on earlier today, or it may have been last night, saying that the GOP is essentially trying to weasel out of repeal and replace and saying it's pitchfork time. Is there talk up on the Hill of if we can't do this, voters are going to hold us responsible?
I think Republicans are in a really tough place. But the problem is that this bill, which repeals Obamacare, which they've been promising to do for 7 years, is not very popular. So they've got this very unpopular bill up against this promise that they really feel like they need to at least make an attempt.
Yeah, there was the president's victory with the House when they passed some version of repeal and replace a while ago back in May. It does bring to memory President Reagan, who said that the closest thing to eternal life is a government program. The Republicans are learning this. Something else that President Reagan pushed hard for and got and is being quoted a lot right now is tax reform. Take a listen to the president last night about that.
We're moving quickly to pass a massive tax cut and simplification for the middle class. We want new tax returns. We want simplification. We want reform. And you know what we really want? We want massive tax cuts. That's what we're doing for business. That's what we're doing for the middle class.
Get to what this will specifically look like in a minute. But is there any reason to think that getting tax reform through the Republican House and Republican Senate, as fractured as they are right now, is going to be easier than getting health care through both houses?
Not necessarily. However, politically, it seems easier on paper. Remember, President Trump said health care is complicated. tax cuts are a little easier to understand. There aren't as many moving parts in cutting taxes. In reforming the whole tax code, like President Reagan did in 1986, that's another story. But there can be some kind of smaller deal potentially.
The one thing that we're hearing tossed around by both sides, you heard it from the president, tax cuts for the, in air quotes, middle class. You hear from Republicans, we don't necessarily need tax cuts on the rich. And then obviously you've got Democrats who say any tax cut that Republicans put forth is just about millionaires and billionaires. All these terms are great in talking points. Then they actually have to be defined on paper come a real bill. Have you gotten a sense from Republicans where they're going to draw the line on the difference between the middle class and the rich? Who gets the cuts, who doesn't?
I don't have a sense as to where they're going to draw the line. We're hoping to get some of those details this week.
Is it surprising that even when I've pushed a number of Republican congressmen, none of them seem to have an answer for that very simple number? Is it 100,000 income, 200,000, 300,000? Nothing.
You would think by now they've been talking about it for a long time. I mean, I've been covering taxes for many years, and in prior administrations, I mean, the Republicans and the Democrats were talking about this. The tax writers have been working behind the scenes, and we're hoping this week that the so-called Big Six of GOP leaders is actually going to give us some details on what they're talking about.
Kevin Brady was saying perhaps something on Wednesday, although they've pushed so many deadlines, who knows. Kim Dixon, thank you very much, as always. A lot to talk about in the coming months.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Elizabeth?
Another strong earthquake striking Mexico today. It comes less than a week after a 7.1 magnitude quake killed at least 295 people. Jonathan Hunt joins us live from Mexico City with the very latest on the rescue efforts there. Hi, Jonathan. What can you tell us?
Liz, good morning. It was a very rude awakening for the people of Mexico City this morning, a city that is obviously still very much on edge following Tuesday's huge earthquake. The alarm sounded here at 7:55 this morning, and a lot of high-rise buildings, including our hotel, were immediately evacuated. Ultimately, there were no reports of further damage here in Mexico City. This quake this morning was centered about 300 miles south in Oaxaca. We are getting reports of damage there. Meanwhile, back here in Mexico City, the search and rescue operations continue, including this one behind me here. This was an office building that collapsed, and as you look at the rescue workers on top of that pile of rubble now, they are making their way through what was the ceiling of the 4th floor. It is believed that there were a lot of people working on that 4th floor. At the time of the earthquake, there are still many people unaccounted for from this building, so they are hoping, almost against hope, that they may yet find a survivor. But we are obviously reaching the end of the period where people could be expected to survive. Some of the search and rescue operations have in fact now been wrapped up. We were at one at a textile factory yesterday when they obviously decided there were no more signs of life. There was an emotional moment when all the hundreds of workers who had been digging there gathered together, removed their hard hats, sang in unison the national anthem, and then this musical tribute to those who had lost their lives. Listen here. Now, Liz, veteran rescue workers will tell you that in these kind of conditions, the limit that anybody could be expected to survive is about 4 days, 96 hours. We are just 2 hours away from reaching that point. So while these workers behind me continue to hope that they may find survivors, clearly every minute that passes makes it less and less likely.
Right.
Liz?
Oh, Jonathan, that's a tough story. Thank you so much for bringing it to us. We appreciate it. Leland?
Sure.
Oh, coming up, a closer look into the investigation to Russian meddling in the 2016 elections and allegations that Vladimir Putin, whether he had a shirt on or not, paid thousands of dollars for fake ads on Facebook through the Kremlin regime. And
new details into Russian interference in the 2016 presidential election. Nearly half of the country learning they were targeted by Russian hackers. The Department of Homeland Security notifying that 21 states on Friday, including several won by Hillary Clinton. Here to talk more about that, and of course, the latest on the Russia probe is Josh Gerstein from Political. Thank you so much for joining us, Josh.
Hey, Elizabeth, good to be here.
As we talked about, I don't even really know where to begin. We heard this news last night that 21 states, if the correct wording would say that they were tampered with during the election. Can you elaborate a little bit more on that? And is that something we should be worried about?
Well, it's really not so much a question of whether the election results were tampered with, but whether there was some effort to do something in connection with their election systems. Usually these efforts are focused on the voter registration systems and maybe trying to hack into them or make copies of them. And so there was this notification to 21 states that the federal government believes that there was at least some attempt. It may have been a lame attempt. It may have been a sophisticated attempt by some actors, probably involving Russia, to get into those systems and muck around.
Officials were hacked, et cetera, et cetera.
Right. But now there's a long distance between that and somebody actually being able to change election outcomes, which is a much trickier thing to do the way the systems are set up.
I want to shift a little bit because there was a lot of news this week about the Russia investigation. A lot of heat has turned up around Paul Manafort. What's your takeaway from that, and what do you think is what we should be paying attention to the most?
Well, I mean, the big news there was that there's word that Paul Manafort has been told that he's likely to be indicted. One of the big stories out of the week was the fact that, or I should say at least the allegation that he was trying to trade his position on the Trump campaign for some kind of financial benefit, offering briefings to an individual who apparently owed Manafort and some of his associates money. If he was able to give them information about the Trump campaign, maybe they would pay up on some of their debts. I mean, you can be sure that that's something that Mueller's investigative team, the special counsel Robert Mueller, is looking at very closely. Although it's worth pointing out, it's not really clear whether something like that is illegal. You're not a public official when you're working on a campaign.
That's what I was going to ask you. Is it unsavory or is it criminal?
Well, that is unsavory, probably. It's certainly the kind of thing that would get you fired from most campaigns if anybody heard about it and be a big scandal. Whether it's illegal is another question. I think if you hear about that down the road and part of any criminal charges, it would be more of the atmospherics and telling the narrative than saying that it's necessarily specifically illegal, although it could be, depending on how you set it up. There could be elements of fraud, wire fraud, or other kinds of transactions that maybe could get someone in trouble trying to arrange something like that.
Sort of a sidebar here, but if you looked up at your screen, you probably saw a photo of Mark Zuckerberg this week. Facebook was also in the news when it comes to the Russian investigation and ad buying. Was that a big surprise to you?
Well, I mean, what that shows me is that the Facebook people have sort of made an about face here. They initially were saying, oh, we can't share these ads, especially with Congress. Maybe we can't give them to the special prosecutor unless he has a certain type of warrant. These are private customer information, these ads. And when Mark Zuckerberg returned from maternity leave, from paternity leave, I should say, he was pretty clear that he had made a decision to go in a different direction, to show a more cooperative attitude, and I think to try to ingratiate himself to investigators and the American public as this investigation goes forward.
Well, Josh, there's so much to sort through. We appreciate you joining us. I'm sure we're going to have you back because it's only going to get more heated, if you will, and we're learning more every week. And I know you were at the courthouse this week, so we'll have you back. Thank you so much.
Happy to be here.
Appreciate it. Leland?
Fox News alert. First Lady Melania Trump in Toronto, Canada right now. Her coming off the plane for the Invictus Games. The First Lady and her delegation includes a Gold Star mother and music star Wayne Newton to show their support for the 90 U.S. athletes at the game. Coming up a little bit later in the show, one of those athletes, we'll ask him what it means for the First Lady to be there watching. And also this, fast-moving developments in the situation of President Trump saying that those who take a knee should be fired from the NFL. LeBron James coming out after President Trump said that they were going to disinvite the Golden State Warriors because of Stephen Curry saying he may or may not come. Well, now LeBron James has responded saying, you bum. Stephen Curry already said he ain't going, so therefore ain't no invite. Going to White House was a great honor until you, meaning the president, showed up. Jim Gray on this, the fallout for the NFL, and now, as we can see, the NBA involved as well. Plus, thousands of North Koreans heading to the square in North Korea's capital for an anti-American rally. Our Greg Palcott live in Seoul, South Korea, as many wonder if the war on words will perhaps turn into a real war. Greg?
Amid that big anti-U.S. rally, a bit of a nuke scare on the Korean peninsula on Saturday. An earthquake detected from northeastern North Korea. We'll have all the latest coming up.
Tens of thousands of residents in Puerto Rico have been ordered to evacuate. Officials there are concerned about a nearby dam that was damaged by Hurricane Maria, and they say it could fail. Steve Harrigan is live from San Juan with the very latest. Hi, Steve.
Hi, that's the Oaxaca Dam, and we've made it to northwest Puerto Rico, right outside of that dam. As you can see, some tremendous flooding behind me. There were real concerns that that dam could completely collapse. So they've evacuated about 70,000 people from 2 towns. They did it in a real hurry here, actually putting people on school buses. Despite the fact that most of the people are out of here, there is just tremendous flooding. There's real concern in the outer regions of Puerto Rico just how bad things are. We've made it to one of those outer regions. Here's a look for yourself at just how bad the flooding is here. This part of Oaxaca is so flooded you just have to guess what is where. There's actually houses underneath these satellite dishes. The water is over the houses. Right now we're passing over 4 vehicles. To my left over here is the main street of this region. It is completely underwater. And up ahead is the police station. You can't see that either. It's just guesswork where things are. We're talking about 10 or 15 feet of floodwater. They've had to evacuate people here by school buses, and there is fear that more could be coming. So you have part of a town here pretty much completely underwater, even the police station underwater, so the first responders really can't be much help. And that is before the dam burst. Things already here horrendous, and they could get much worse soon. Elizabeth, back to you.
Those images will take your breath away. Steve, thank you so much. Appreciate it. Leland?
We are just moments away from North Korea's foreign minister's speech to the United Nations. It will be the first time we hear from North Korea since President Trump called their leader, quote, little rocket man, during last night's rally in Alabama. Our Greg Palcott live in Seoul, South Korea. Greg, if history repeats itself, the nickname will not sit well with the North Koreans.
We should get some fiery reaction from North Korea, Leland. Absolutely. First, let's talk about a little bit of a nuke scare we had here on the Korean Peninsula on Saturday, late Saturday Korean time. There were reports of an earthquake coming from northeastern North Korea, not far from where the regime's nuclear test site is. Registered 3.5 on the Richter scale, and it was shallow, and initial reports from China were that it was set off by a detonation. But South Korea and the United States came in and said they believed it was natural. People are not ruling out, however, there might have been a tunnel that had collapsed related to the nuclear detonation there earlier in the month. Meanwhile, in Pyongyang, a very well-orchestrated mass rally against the United States today. 100,000 said to be in attendance. Again, this is in the wake of President Trump's UN address, in which he called for totally destroying North Korea if the U.S. and its allies were threatened, and North Korean leader Kim Jong-un's message that President Trump was mentally deranged. A speaker today saying, get ready for the final decisive battle. Yes, in a half an hour's time or so, we could be hearing from North Korean Foreign Minister Ri Yong-ho, set to speak before the UN General Assembly. Last year, his speech was pretty fiery. You got to believe it's going to be fiery this year, too. Remember, it was from the foreign minister Thursday night that we heard that North Korea might be considering an H-bomb blast over the Pacific Ocean. Got a lot of people here concerned. Finally, this amid new reports Saturday from China that they actually could be coming to line in the wake of the new UN sanctions, saying that they would be limiting the oil supply into North Korea and the textile exports coming out of North Korea, and already had been signed, Leland, that China was trying to crack down on its banks, again, to try to limit the cash flow that is funding the weapons programs. That's been a big deal from President Trump and the Treasury Department in the last couple of days, too. Back to you.
Yeah, certainly the North Koreans feeling under pressure from all areas. Greg Palcott live there in Seoul. Greg, thank you. Liz?
And after the break, we're going to have General Jack Keane, Fox News military analyst, to discuss this and much more. Also, President Trump using strong words for football players protesting the national anthem during his rally on Friday night. How the NFL and now some basketball players are also responding. We'll have the very latest coming up. We are awaiting the North Korean foreign minister to take the podium at the United Nations in New York, as of course the world listened to President Trump at that same podium just days ago. For more insight on the relations between the United States and North Korea, let's bring in Fox News military analyst General Jack Keane. General, thank you for joining us. We appreciate your insight as always.
Good to be here, Elizabeth.
There was so much fallout after the president took the podium and people were analyzing his speech, and of course we're probably going to do the same today. But I'm curious as to what your takeaway is this week, and especially when it comes to the pressure that we're now putting on North Korea that we hadn't been putting on North Korea before, and the potential impact on those pressures, those sanctions.
Well, I thought, generally speaking, it was a very accomplished speech. He focused on reform in the UN. 130 nations showed up Monday of that week to listen to him talk about specifically reform. That is actually staggering in itself. He identified the major threats that we're facing in the near term. And then he concluded by calling on 193 leaders and members of the UN, let's deal with these threats collectively together. Some of that was lost on his critics. But specifically on North Korea, I think this week may be a very pivotal week, because here's what's happened. The United States has issued an executive order saying anybody that trades with North Korea has got to cut the trade off or we'll stop trade with you. He gave President Xi a heads up to that fact. Does that mean that the United States would actually shut off trade with China? That would be a global earthquake in terms of the world economy. What did President Xi do? He complied. So he is cutting off his banks from trading, and they trade in U.S. currency, by the way. Right. He's cutting off his banks from trading with North Korea, just as we expect all the other nations to do who trade with us. That is a stunning achievement. That separates President Trump from all of his predecessors